Good morning and welcome to your lesson on paper 2. Today we are going to be looking at paper 2 question 1. Okay, so the true and false question. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at the image below and identify which statements are explicit, implicit and false. So explicit means clearly stated, so no room for confusion or question. So when you say something very straightforward. Implicit, it's implied or suggested but not stated clearly, and it requires you to read between the lines. Okay, so in the chat bar I want you to give me one example from that list of statements that's an explicit statement, an implicit statement, sorry. So in the chat bar, write down one example of an implicit statement, be able to identify at least one. Okay, so what were the answers? Explicit, it shows a man begging. The man wants change. The man is expressionless. The man looks cold. He doesn't want your money. So things that were explicit, because it says keep your coins, I want change. So implicit, the man is homeless, so reading between the lines, because he looks like a beggar, we can assume the man is homeless, but that's implicit, it's not explicitly stated. The word change has a double meaning. It relates to how homeless are treated in society, and that money isn't enough. False, the man looks happy. The man doesn't want change. The man lives in a nice warm house. Okay, so today's big picture is that we're going to work on identifying and interpreting explicit and implicit information and ideas, and we're going to be picking out evidence from different texts. So we're going to start our work on English language paper 2. So in today's lesson, we're going to gain an overview of what the paper 2 entails and develop the skills needed to approach and answer paper 2 question 1. So the aim of paper 2 is to explore how writers have particular viewpoints and perspectives on issues or themes that are important to the way we think and live our lives. In section A, we'll be reading 2 linked sources from different time periods and genres to provide an opportunity to consider viewpoints and perspectives over time. The sources for the reading questions will be non-fiction and literary non-fiction texts. They'll be drawn from the 19th century and either the 20th or 21st century. So you can have one old text and one modern one. In section B, there'll be a single writing task related to the theme of section A. It will specify audience, purpose and form, and will use a range of opinions, statements and writing scenarios to provoke a response. So this is the extract we're going to be looking at today. It's called Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. It was published in 1933, so before World War II. And it's an autobiographical extract on the theme of poverty. Paddy was my mate for about the next fortnight, and as he was the first tramp I'd known at all well, I want to give an account of him. I believe that he was a typical tramp, and there are tens of thousands in England like him. He was a tallish man, aged about 35, with fair hair going grey and watery blue eyes. His features were good, but his cheeks had sunk and had that greyish, dirty and the grain look that comes of a bread and margarine diet. He was dressed rather better than most tramps, in a tweed shooting jacket and a pair of old suit trousers. He was bothered about his appearance and carried a razor and a boot brush that he would not sell, even though one could tell he was a tramp from 100 yards away. He'd been brought up in Ireland, served 2 years in the war and then worked in a factory, but he had lost his job 2 years earlier. He was horribly ashamed of being a tramp, but he had picked up all a tramp's habits. He browsed the pavements endlessly, never missing a cigarette end or even an empty cigarette packet, as he used the foil paper for rolling cigarettes. He did not commit crime, however. Once, Paddy noticed a bottle of milk on a doorstep, evidently left there by mistake. He stopped, eyeing the bottle up hungrily. "Christ," he said, "there's good food going to waste. Somebody could knock that bottle off, steal it easy." I saw that he was thinking of stealing it himself. He looked up and down the street. It was a quiet residential street and there was nobody in sight, but he turned away, saying gloomily, "Best leave it. It don't do a man no good to steal. Thank God I've never stolen nothing yet." He had two subjects of conversation: the shame of being a tramp and the best way of getting a free meal. Like most tramps, he was passionately mean about matches. He had a box of matches when I met him, but I never saw him strike one, and he used to lecture me whenever I struck one off mine. His method was to cadge light from strangers, sometimes going without a smoke for half an hour rather than strike one of his own matches. Nevertheless, he was a good fellow, generous by nature, and capable of sharing his last crust with a friend. Indeed, he did literally share his last crust with me more than once. He was probably capable of work too, if he ate well for a few months and got some new, clean clothes. So, what we're looking at is this question. Read again the first part of Source A from lines 1 to 12. Choose 4 statements below which are true. You would shade the circles in the boxes of the ones that you think are true. Now, obviously, we can't do that because we're at home. You would choose a maximum of 4 statements. If you make an error, you would cross out the whole box. And if you change your mind and require a statement that has been crossed out, you would draw a circle around the box. It's really important that you pay attention to those instructions. So, in the exam, you would get an extract like this, and it would identify the bits that you're looking at. And so lines 1 to 12, this is lines 1 to 12. Obviously it's not 12 because of the way I've had to format it, but that's what it is. And you've got a number of true and false statements here. There are 8 of them. So you have to put the 4 statements you think are true. So in the chat box, can you give me a list of the 4 statements on this slide that you think are true? So here are the answers. Paddy, though a tramp, cares about his appearance. So we know that because he carries a razor. His eyes were blue, albeit a watery blue, but they're blue. Paddy had been unemployed and homeless for 2 years, and Paddy was ashamed at living on the streets as a tramp. Okay, so our evidence comes from here. So the evidence will be there in the text. So he was bothered about his appearance because it tells us this, because he carried a razor and a boot brush. His eyes were watery blue. He'd lost his job 2 years earlier. He was horribly ashamed of being a tramp. Okay, so the information is all within the text. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to the assignments tab, and I want you to read the extract there, focusing on the first part of the source from lines 1 to 20, and I want you to choose 4 statements that are true. So that must be done by the end of today's session. You need to go to the assignments tab and just write on that assignment the 4 statements that are true.